All right. Well, welcome to the Learning Lab here at the Texas School Safety Center. We are going to be talking about cybersecurity, which I will say we've been asked to do. A lot of people think they know what cybersecurity is, but we're finding out they really don't. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in the context of school safety. So we have two expert guests with us today. We have Karen Fuller with CyFair. And so, Karen, tell us a little bit about what you do, but also how big your district is, because we're going to be talking about various size districts. And so we want to know a little bit more about the context of what you're working in.
Okay, so I am the Director of Network Infrastructure and Communications for Cypress Fairbanks ISD. We are sort of northwest of Houston. We're in the Houston area or Harris County. We've got a little over 118,000 students and about a little over 19,000 staff members. So we're the third largest district in Texas. But
Okay.
I've worked with different size school districts throughout my career, from little bitty, I always say where they play six-man football, all the way through the largest district in Texas. So it's quite an experience to work with those districts and understand their challenges when it comes to cybersecurity, network infrastructure, safety, security, protecting all of the corners and the walls and everything of our district. So that's where my background comes from.
Awesome. Well, welcome. And Todd,
Thank
you're
you.
with TEA. You are the Deputy CISO and Cybersecurity Coordinator. So tell us what you're in charge of.
Yeah, so internally at TEA, I deal with some of our internal cybersecurity stuff there, with some application development and just various aspects of security, incident response. But outward facing, I work with the regions to support them in cybersecurity in the districts as well. And so I'm a cybersecurity cheerleader. I try to inform people and educate. I do a monthly webinar for that.
Okay.
I'm the point of contact with the district cybersecurity coordinator. So anything that they need or comes up in their world, I'm free and open to respond to them and work with them in any way I can. And again, so just outward facing in that aspect. And there's a lot of stuff just all over the place.
Well, we're going to start already. I'm going to address the big elephant in the room, which is we're going to be talking about a lot of acronyms. So I'm going to just say, I'm going to mark it down. We're going to do one. What is Deputy CISO, CISO? What's the first one?
CISO is Chief Information Security Officer.
Okay, there we go.
There you go.
So
First
most organizations have a CISO. So my boss is the CISO. I'm her deputy to take a little load off of all the stuff that she has to do.
All right. Well, we're going to try to break down cybersecurity so that my mom can understand it, or myself. And so first off, what is cybersecurity? Because I think we have a lot of educators out there or people who are in charge of funding technology and safety and security. And when we talk about cybersecurity, I think we need to just get a basic understanding of what that is. So, Todd, Karen?
It's basically securing your technology. So InfoSec is another term that's out there in the space. So information security.
Okay.
And so it's just like locking down all of your technology, your firewalls, any applications that you have, the things that are keeping the people out that shouldn't be in. So cybersecurity is just generally involved with that, and it transcends even just digital stuff in the cybersecurity world. Even like physical security of data centers and buildings and that sort of thing kind of comes into play more and more recently with different things that are happening. But yeah, it's just anything that's protecting your digital environment.
But Karen, we've also talked before in the past that is like a lot of our physical security, our doors, all these automatic locking systems, or all of these new softwares that are coming out that are tracking people or hotspots or all of these new things. Those are also a lot of times needed to be housed on the district's network.
So really, if you have anything, I've always said if it connects to electricity, it probably connects to technology.
There you go.
Because it has something behind the ground, behind the wall, it's connected to a network. So if you're doing your emergency panic buttons, it's probably connected to your infrastructure, to your cabling infrastructure, your network infrastructure, and you're managing it with a piece of software. If you're doing your phones on your campuses, those are connected to your network, and your network, they're dependent upon the network running. So all of the emergency response systems that we're putting in our district, the monitoring the video cameras that are monitoring our network, all of that's connected to your switches, and your switches are part of our cybersecurity of where we come behind and make sure we've got the protection on those switches, where we have to update the iOS that runs the switches, the OS, all of that's there. So what used to be just called network, if you connect to the network, you got to the internet.
Right.
That's the way it used to look like. But now, if it plugs into a switch, if it plugs into electricity, if it connects to wireless, if you're doing anything that passes zeros and ones over a network type infrastructure, you're affected. To cybersecurity affects what we do. And the protection of those devices, the protection of that software can make or break a school district.
And so also when we're talking about obviously facilities, we're also talking, like you said, also a lot of school districts, especially after the pandemic, are, that used to be the goal, one-to-one devices, but now generally after the pandemic, everybody has those devices. So students are receiving devices from the schools.
Yes.
And so it's also that management of what are we giving them access to and what are we limiting.
Exactly. So that's all cybersecurity too. I've often said when I do a one-to-one presentation on how to manage a one-to-one network that how many devices you're handing out, that's how many hackers you have access to. Because students they're curious. And
Right.
a lot of times for students, it's not done intentional. It's just that they're interested in that. And especially in this day and time, they're used to being able to go out and get access to resources. And a lot of times when we give them devices in school districts, we're restricting them. So then they figure out, how do I get access to this resource on my school provided device that I have on my personal device? So again, it's everything that we do is an awareness and is training, both for the students, the parents, the staff, everything that we do, that whatever we do in this day and time, you're going to touch cybersecurity in some form or fashion, no matter what you do in a school district or even a business.
Todd, what are some of the Texas mandates required to address cybersecurity?
There's not too many. Texas Education Code 11.175 is mostly where they're all housed. And so there's a requirement for school districts to have a cybersecurity plan that protects student data. There's a requirement for school districts to report breaches of system security. And so the definition of that, the easiest way to explain it is if student PII is involved in kind of a malicious attack. And so apart from that, and then maybe some other reporting requirements, there's not much currently. There's CIPA, which is a federal
That's the second one, CIPA.
CIPA Child Information Protection Act, I believe. And that's just around internet filtering for the most part. And there's no strict requirement unless you're getting some maybe E-rate funding. You have to certify that you're doing that. To my understanding, I don't.
If you're accepting any type of federal funds from the federal government, you have to meet the Children's Internet Protection Act, which is content filtering and filtering of the devices. And you also have to have a hearing with your school board every so often, saying that you're meeting these requirements to continue to receive those federal fundings.
Okay. So one of the things you said is you have to have a cybersecurity plan, right? That was the first
Yes.
one. Where do y'all have, what does that mean? When he's saying you have to have a plan, what does that actually translate to in your school district?
So that translates that we're meeting a lot of the cybersecurity standards like NIST, and there's NIST is
National Institute of Standards Technology.
There you go.
Okay.
Trying to remember all of these
federal
acronyms.
Framework.
Yes, it's a framework that actually NIST is a framework that's even practiced overseas in some form of what you're doing. But what the NIST framework says is that there are 5 areas that you have to protect, and it gets really detailed of how you're protecting it. You get scored off of it.
But where's that plan? That's really what I want to know.
So our plan is
that housed in technology?
Yes.
Is that housed in security? Where is it?
Typically, it's going to sit in your technology services department.
Okay.
And the plan basically says these are the things that we're going to do this year. This is what we have in plan for next year. So it's like a true plan, but you're actually, based on where you scored in this evaluation, you say, this is my first priority, second priority. All right, this year I'm at a level 1. Next year I want to be at a level 2. You practice table talks where you say, okay, what if this happened to us? How are we going to address it? Those things are all a part of your cybersecurity plan.
So if I'm a new superintendent or a new assistant superintendent, that would be obviously something I would want to know. What is
What's my
are.
plan?
What's my plan? Where
Where are
is
we at?
it? Where are we at? And you mentioned level 1, level 2, so there's different levels
Mm-hmm.
to find out where we are. And then I'm assuming, does that also show where we can go, where we
Mm-hmm.
need to go?
Yes, it does. And it's like anything that you do. If you do your campus improvement plan,
Correct.
in your campus improvement
dip, the
plan,
zip.
yep, you say, okay, next year we want to try to be here, but depending on what's happening, you may
Right.
not get there till or you may get there earlier, depending on your resources, depending on your test scores, all of that things. So that's the same thing, or that's the same way that a cybersecurity plan should work in a school district. You do your assessments, you look and see where you're at, you evaluate what you've implemented, you evaluate your scores, and you say, can we meet this? What's it going to take for us to meet it? And sometimes funding is something that may be an objective
Right.
that maybe slows you down. And then other times it's just the processes and the procedures that you currently have in place and how do you change it. And anything with what we do, whether you're doing a campus improvement plan or you're doing a safety plan, it all has to do with culture and how you build your culture around what you're doing and how you're doing it. So again, it's another part of culture that we have in our districts that we have to start establishing early. We establish our culture about campus improvement. We establish our culture about physical safety and security. What is your culture on cybersecurity and protecting all of your digital and your data information that's there?
Would you say that that's probably one area where districts are really struggling just because they're already working on that educational piece? And now safety obviously has been a big focus this school year. And so when we're looking at, we still have, employees who are clicking on those emails that we've told them 20 times
Exactly.
not to click on.
Yeah. I think this is what I've seen in my career is sometimes when you use those big words that are scary, that's when people, oh my gosh, I can't do this. This is, and if I do this, then how's it going to affect what we do? So what we need to do for this cybersecurity education or changing that culture is make it more relevant to how it affects them personally.
Okay.
Because if we can change it and put it in a personal perspective and not really use those scary words, use more simple words like, okay, how do you manage your personal accounts? How do you manage your bank account? How do
Right.
you manage your electricity account? What do you do with your driver's license number? Those kind of things. And when you start relating it to them in the terms they understand, they begin to understand what cybersecurity means.
Well, and it's saying we need to have those same levels of security at work.
Exactly,
Right? It's
yes.
not just like we would lock the door at our home when we leave. We need to lock the doors in this building.
Yes, and there's a number of different ways to lock the door. So we start describing, we start describing in terms of, okay, if you need to lock this door, this is what you have to do. And you just try to keep it simple. Try to keep it enough to get people energized and maybe even excited about it. Who can be excited about cybersecurity?
Well, we're going to get them excited by the
figure
end of
that.
this. Before we get into any more details, I want to make sure, are there any federal cybersecurity laws? Just so, I know we talked about state, there's kind of few, but are there some federal ones that...
I'm not aware of any other than maybe the SIPA for E-rate
Okay.
that is required for anyone to follow. There's definitely guidelines and suggestions out there, but I don't think there's any ramifications if you don't follow
But
it.
if you talk about FERPA and all of the other laws that we have to follow federally, all of that connects to cybersecurity. All of that's a part of information getting out to where it shouldn't be.
Correct.
So even though we don't call it a cybersecurity law or it specifically says cybersecurity, all of that, if you read that
Because
wording,
it's all being housed on digital,
Exactly.
all of this information is being
Yes.
housed.
everything is housed in some type of virtual somewhere,
Right.
on
Can you
devices.
tell us where that is, Karen?
No.
Okay, I can't either.
It's
all right.
It's in
At
the air
Amazon
floating
data
around.
center somewhere. Yeah.
Amazon or somewhere.
Can you, just because I think we will have some people here who don't know or aren't familiar with E-rate, can you just synopsisize E-rate in 2 quick sentences?
I can.
Okay.
E-rate is a federally funded program. It's not a grant. You have to apply, and it's based on your free and reduced lunch rates in your school district.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you have to apply every year.
Huh? It's
That's what I
every
thought.
year. Yeah.
Okay. What do you think, Karen, has been what do you think is the biggest challenge? And then, Todd, you serve the entire state. What are you seeing as the biggest successes as well?
So I think for us, you always say funding. Funding is always going to be a challenge in any program that
Sure.
we do. But I think it's more of awareness. It's more of educating the end users, educating your staff, educating your communities, educating your students.
So when you say educating staff, what does that actually mean for your district? What do y'all do?
So for our district, Cy-Fair is one of 6 districts, I think, in Texas that are, we have what's called the TLE certification. So it's the Trusted Learning Environment certification that COSIN has. And there's, forget how many across the nation, but it's very few across the nation. And part of that program requires us to make cybersecurity and data protection an awareness across our whole district. So it's not just technology doing, it's curriculum and instruction.
Okay.
It's finance.
So it's multiple
facilities.
stakeholders.
It's everybody in there, and there are requirements that we have to meet to get that seal every 2 years. And we just received our 3rd application, which means our 6th year of the seal. With that, there's a lot of education and a lot of best practices that we promote throughout the year with this is what a phishing email is. We do phishing email campaigns and we see who clicks on that email. And oops, sorry, it's not, this was actually a test. No, you didn't pass the test. So now you can go review these videos that are here to help you be a little bit more efficient.
Do they have to review the videos?
It's recommended.
Okay.
It's very much recommended. So we do that. We do campaigns. We have posters around our campuses about cybersecurity, what it means, about phishing emails, about being safe on the internet, about, being positive and using your resources in the good way, not using your resources to harm anything. Cyberbullying, all that's
Some of the
there.
things I hear also from teachers is you're giving us all of this hardware, right, with all this latest technology, but then when we want to go out and use this app that I found on some random thing that I was looking at 2:00 in the morning, they don't understand why the district is saying you can't use that. And I mean, the answer honestly is because it's not part of that curricular plan on how we're wanting to do that. And that curricular plan is connected, I'm assuming, to all of the technology software things that y'all are saying, yes, you can use that. No, you can't. Because if not, it's basically just like opening the doors to all of those attackers.
You're exactly right. The other thing that typically that free software does is ask for data.
Okay.
And the data that free software takes could be data that could be used in a way that maybe is not a positive way for the district. They may be using that data that you get for that free software to build more advertisements, to do marketing, and they may anonymize some of that data and put it out there, but they don't have your permission to do it.
So I'm going to give an example. Kahoot.
Yeah.
Kahoot is used fairly often in classrooms, right? It requires kids to use their own device, right? So it says, hey, we're going to do Kahoot. I'm not really sure 100% how it works, but they pull out their phone. Maybe they do a QR code, and then they are doing some type of survey, something.
Yes.
So, so is that something a district has to approve, or is that something, yes?
If you're collecting if any business or an application,
Kahoot, for
whatever,
example.
Kahoot, is collecting any data from that school district, from those students, yes, it needs to be approved. It needs to be approved not only for use on the network, because we don't know on our network what path it's taking to get that data and to send that data back and forth. We don't know where they're putting that data. We don't know
Because
where
the
that data
kids
is
could
being
be logged
stored.
onto the network, or they could be logged onto their own. I think that's the other thing. Kids are like, but I'm on my own data.
Yeah, you're on your own data plan, but you're giving out your information, or you're giving
As a
out data
student.
as a student. And the other thing is, if you really read some of those T's and C's for those terms and conditions for those applications, it'll say if the student has to be 13 or older, or if they're below 13, you have to have parental permission to do that. So there's a lot of information in those agreements that we call them click agreements. You have to be very careful about click agreements, because a click agreement, you really don't know what you're clicking on.
But at the same time, we also don't want to hinder any innovation that the educators are trying to bring in.
Exactly.
Right, as well. So what is the model that you use for your educators? I'm assuming you have an instructional technology group that says, this is what we want to provide. This is the type of technology we want to use in the classroom.
So technology services has a philosophy of, we don't want to say N-O, but we need to K-N-O-W what you're doing.
Looky
the more
there.
we know what you're doing, the better we can support you and how you're going to use this product in your instructional environment. And we have a very close relationship with our instructional technology department. So the good thing is we're all on the same page, but that's because we've worked together for so long and we've sort of learned to talk the same talk. And walk the same walk. And that's sometimes what we struggle in K-12 is you've got your silos of your technology hardware people and your technology software people. And if you can bring those together and have them work together on a daily minute basis on what's happening with the instructional side, it helps the physical technology people understand more what the virtual or the instructional technology people are doing.
So I was going to say, so the software side is really the instructional technology. The hardware side is your database managers, things like that.
All your physical
and
devices.
now this year we're adding that whole safety and security side as well, where we're also bringing in now all your security directors to come in and work.
Security directors, get your technology people involved. I mean, it's we're here to help you. Like I said, we want to know, KNOW, what you're doing so that we can help protect not only what we do on our wires and cable and all that, but we want to protect what you're doing to make sure the school is safe and that it can function when needed. Once you push that button, we need to make sure that communication is there. And it's going to travel over our wires.
So, Todd, I think, as a state agency, we're also very aware that over 60% of our districts are rural. And so they may not even have an IT hardware person or an IT software person or even a safety director. So what are some of the things that you're seeing that districts are doing well in the realm of cybersecurity without all of those people, right? Because we have districts that have...
To touch on what Karen was saying before we get off that, just even the applications themselves, like, the security of the applications that are being used in your environment, they vary greatly on how they're developed, especially if you're installing that on your devices. The things that it's doing in the background, the things it's doing with the data, they do that vastly differently between the different companies. And especially in the education space, there's a lot of things that aren't really that great and secure in the way they're handling your data. And so really evaluating those and keeping those, understanding what's going to happen with your data before you actually start using those is one of the things that you need to do. That's the KNO, that you need to know what's going on with that. As far as a resource for that, Region 16 has a great, on their website, they have a toolbox that's great. They've researched some of the T's and C's on there, and they've posted like things that are good and things that are bad, maybe things you should read for yourself and decide if you want to do that. They've got a whole list of those on there. But to your question again, there's the smaller districts, like you said, they might not even have a full, I've talked to more than one that, where the technical director used to be a teacher that then became involved in technology. And then, through the years, like someone left and they couldn't fill the position. So like, hey, you're the person that needs to do this.
Director.
You know computers.
Yeah.
You know computers. So you need to get in there and start, you're a guy or gal. And so, and not disparaging any of them, though. They're doing a great job. The ones that I've met, they're fabulous. But, they just don't have that wealth of experience, in technology that someone that, at a bigger district could hire someone specifically that knows exactly what, all the ins and outs of that. And so struggling with that. And then the staff that they might incorporate. I know there's ones that, they drive bus during the morning and then they help, distribute Chromebooks and things during the day. And so, they just don't know what they don't know. And, there's challenges there. Like I said, they're doing great. We're reaching out, trying to educate them and or a resource for them in any way as that goes. And I think there's different groups like TETL that Karen's a member of, and others.
Which is what?
Texas Education Technology Leaders.
Okay.
Yeah, and then others that are trying to promote and and encourage them in that fashion as well. And so getting involved in those, and then the regions are always a great support. They in every aspect, like as I'm learning more and more what the regions do, they'll instruct, if a new librarian comes on, they'll help her get up to speed or him up to speed. Same with technology. If there's a new person at technology, they'll help them, with their, firewalls, anything, if they've utilized the services of the regions. So the regions are a great resource.
Are
for
there
the smaller districts
regions
as well.
that provide some of the network larger if
Oh,
you don't have
yeah.
that in your
Yeah,
own?
definitely. I think they all.
Yeah.
This is part of the stuff that I'm just recently kind of found out. Yeah, they have different services that they provide depending on what your need is,
Yeah,
and
the-
so you can call them up and they can come configure your firewall if you need
don't have
if you need
one.
an application that's not working right and something's getting blocked.
Uh-huh.
They can come help you troubleshoot that and figure that out.
The regional service centers have a lot of wealth of information. A lot of the regional service centers are actually a hub for their internet services for their school districts that are connected to them, and then they provide support. So quite a few of the regional service centers in Texas actually provide the firewall and content filtering for their districts. So I would highly recommend that if this is something that you're not familiar with and not sure who to reach out to your regional service center and ask, do you know who my, what I'm doing in my district? Or I've often recommended that if you can't, we're lucky to have CISOs and certified cyber technology specialists. But if you don't grow your own, find
Right.
somebody that's willing to take the risk to go out there. And the risk, I'm going to say, is just learning. And you got to have the time to learn.
Sure.
But if you find somebody that's interested in that, grow your own. Send them to your service centers for training. Todd offers a monthly cybersecurity webinar for public educators for all of our security contacts to be a part of. And he provides a lot of information out there. There's organizations like TEDL, the one that I'm a member of, that we're very active in a lot of the cybersecurity stuff. And some of your vendor partners will help you as well
Sure. As they
understand what
should.
you mean. Yes. And they're very good. And a lot of information is free out there on the internet. You just have to find your peers and say, what are you doing? How did you find this out? How is it affecting you? How did you go get training? Those kind of things. You don't have to have a certification to work with cybersecurity. You have to have the willing of time, understanding, and patience.
Right. Well, and I know that a lot of times, there's a lot of great ideas. Let's just talk about student safety on where they're at. And I think one of the things that we hear a lot about, and I'm going to actually move it to transportation, right? So the transportation of knowing when your kid gets on a bus, the route that they're on, and when they get off the bus. Is that something that y'all have?
We do that in Cypher.
Okay, so obviously there's some software and hardware involved in that.
It is.
And so what are those conversations? So when a director, right? So it could be a transportation director, it could be a child nutrition director, it could. So we're not just talking necessarily about teachers and principals.
Exactly.
It's across the board. Where do you want to be in that conversation? Obviously, you want to be in there from the beginning, but what are the types of questions that they need to make sure that they're asking for those different softwares? Because there's a multitude of them out there. And so sometimes districts are like, look, this is our end. This is what we're wanting to do. But we don't necessarily know which one is the best one. How do we vet these different types of softwares that we're wanting to provide that next level of security, right?
First of all, definitely get your technology services people or your technology person involved at the very beginning. Because sometimes if it's a smaller district, they may not know what questions to ask, but the more that they
Exactly.
hear what's happening, that'll start throwing up some, I wonder, the last person I worked with, this is the way we did it. Are you doing it this way? The other thing I would do is definitely use your connections. So if this is new to you and you're looking at different softwares out there for those different applications that are available to track students, ask the vendor that's recommending that to you to give you references, and that you call and talk to the technology services people
Right.
about how they manage that application and what they do with that applications. And then, of course, I would rely on your service centers. Call the larger districts. One of the things that people think is because we're a larger district, we don't have the same problems that small districts have. Well, I'm telling you, we do. It's just ours is on 118,000 student
Right.
scale, where if you're in a small
But you're
district,
still dealing with fifth graders, sixth
you're
graders,
fifth
ninth
graders.
graders.
You're dealing with data security. You're dealing with connectivity. We're all facing the same challenges, just on
Right.
larger and smaller scales. So even reach out to a larger district that's using the same product. And a lot of times your larger districts are probably going to break it more than your smaller districts because of the capacity that we use
Right.
it.
The sheer number.
But I would definitely always have that technology person involved. And no question is a dumb question. I don't care what it is. And even if you don't know and things pop up, ask. Always ask.
And I'm assuming as well, we also need our community relations
Yes.
person or somebody talking to the parents, because I also know that parents are very concerned about who all has access to all of their kids' data. I
Yes.
mean, I know when I worked at a district, that was one of the concerns is, well, if somebody's following my kid, that also means someone's following my kid. And so,
Exactly.
what's that level of security and privacy that we have for that?
So there is a data privacy agreement that vendors should be signing with your district, large or small. And that data privacy agreement basically stipulates to those vendors, this is how you're going to treat my data. These are the parameters of where you can put my data. This is the only part of my data you can have. And it's basically holding the security side of them getting your data and how they're going to secure it. If they can't answer those questions, that throws up red flags. That's where we have to be very careful about the smaller companies. We've actually had companies tell us, sorry, I can't sign this agreement because I don't have enough money to have a legal counsel to help me fight it. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, if you can't sign this agreement, then we can't
Exactly.
use your software because we've got little bitty kids that
Exactly.
they don't even understand what Social Security number means. And you're getting their information and you're going to have it for the rest of their life, even though we say it's going to be deleted and all that stuff. But you're going to have that information for the rest of that child's life. And we need to make sure you're protecting it because these are our kids. So that's what those data privacy agreements will do for you. It's that other level of protection that really has nothing to do with the technical. It's more of practices
Right.
that company's putting in place. So even TEDL, we've got a data privacy agreement that we offer for schools to use across the state. And a lot of times when companies come in, like your transportation tracking software, they'll just say, we need this data in your student information system. We'll just give them a data dump. And they'll give them anything to the kid's birthday, to the
Wow.
address that they're in, what city they were born in, all of that. But they don't need all of that.
They don't need it.
They just
Absolutely.
need certain things. And that data privacy agreement has a form in it that says, what data am I giving you? What data do you need? Well, this is the only data I'm giving you.
You could also just give them a number, right?
You
like
could.
Celina Bly's number
Yeah.
Yeah, do you have to use
445.
the Social
You don't
Security
even
number,
have to
like,
use
you
that.
know,
type
We
of
don't
stuff.
even use Social Security numbers. If
Right.
you use Social Security numbers, then we do need to have a talk. Because
All right, if you're using Social Security
scared there for a
numbers,
minute. I was
please
like,
call
wait, you're-
Karen.
No, I mean but that's sometimes
But I think that's one
when
of the
they
things
dump that data, they
when
don't
we're
think
talking
about that.
it's not necessarily about the iPad that we're giving the kids. It's really, would you say cybersecurity affects every single department and even maintenance?
If it plugs into
know,
power, it's going to
plugs
connect
into
to
power.
the network.
Target had a major breach
Yes.
from a HVAC HVAC vendor that had a default password, I think it was, or something on the system that got compromised, and they had a ransomware, a data breach incident or through AC vendor. So it involves every aspect.
So let's go to that really quickly. What is a cyber attack, and what are the types that districts encounter?
So there's
I'll let you
there's
start.
a lot of stuff on that. DDoS attack. I don't know if we've talked about that. Distributed denial of service. So there's denial of service, which is one computer sending a flood of information to try to clog up a network. Distributed denial of service is many computers. So they'll use a botnet. Botnet being like compromised computers.
And bot, is that an acronym?
No, it's just
Okay,
a robot.
just a name.
Like
Robot.
Okay.
just like
Double checking.
For
yeah.
robot.
So these threat actors can take over computers that you'll never home users, different
Okay.
things, organizations, and they'll plant some software in there, and they'll use those to send out spam, phishing emails. They'll use those to do distributed denial of service attacks. So they'll sending large packets and different information that's going to basically clog down a network. It could even buffer overrun a server so it crashes, and
Wow.
so you lose access to things. So that's very common. I mean, you can go onto the dark web and buy a DDoS as a service. Most of these are as a service these days. Just like you can, do anything else in the cloud. And there's bad guys that
Okay.
are setting these things up, and they can buy one for $5 a day and do a DDoS attack on
each district
on a
or
target.
something.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that commonly happens during state testing.
yeah, I think
Really?
DDoS attacks are one of the things that's probably pretty common. That
So
it's,
you get
that
paid
it's
for that?
possibly
Yes, we
student.
do.
The student is the threat actor there.
They hire it.
I mean, there's phishing emails too. We're all phishing, and the human aspect of and phishing is like well, phishing in general is like 80% of breaches. Start with a phishing email, and there's a vendor that EDR, endpoint detection response, which is kind of next generation firewall or antivirus. One of the vendors had a report, and they were talking about that more than 70% of the attacks these days, the last year, didn't even have like a malicious file. It was like more phishing and more credential-based, attacks. And so, I mean, there's malicious files as well, things that, people get you to click on and open. Again, kind of related with phishing. There's a litany of things. Vulnerabilities, like there's, people, what public-facing websites that we have. There's things that you log into. There's applications, there's programs behind that are running that server, and they have vulnerabilities. There's things that pop up that, someone's found a way to tweak this login or inject some code or do a SQL injection. SQL is, standard query language,
Yes,
I think. And so like it's basically a database.
I thought it was a word.
A database, a database feature. And so you can inject some SQL command in like a login field, and then you can get elevated access to a system there. So there's those vulnerabilities, if they aren't patched, those are exposed. There's many
ways
there's
to
many
attack.
ways. Remote desktop is a huge one if it's there's
all different type of ways to get your networks.
internet.
But
Another
what's
way
the best? Okay, so then what's the best way to mitigate that? Training.
Awareness.
What about dual login?
Well,
or
there's
dual
multi-factor.
Yeah, so
Multi-factor.
if that is one of the top of the things that can help with that, or at least the human aspect. So the phishing aspect.
Human aspect means train your people.
Awareness. Training.
Awareness.
Well, even if you train all your people, there's still that 2% that will click on any link and put their credentials in.
It's like answering
it happens
that
all the time.
call that the soliciting calls that you get. That's like a phishing attack.
Okay.
Yeah.
They just answer the call. It's like, why'd you call me?
And so MFA is a really multi-factor authentication is a great way. We should all be doing that on the emails. I think Microsoft, Google, like
on emails.
Specifically emails, because that's the first place they're going to attack. So if you answer a phishing email and put in your credentials, they're going to try to let me see where they log in with their email.
How does the multi-factor thing work with an email? I'm not. Maybe I'm already doing it and I don't know what it is.
So like you set it up on your phone, or you can have various methods. You can have a little key that you plug in your computer. But anytime you actually log in, like you do at your bank,
right?
So like once you log into your bank, no matter where you're at, it's going to send a code to your phone, either text or through an app that you have, to verify that it was you that sent that. And so if they don't have that, so if they just got your username and password, and they get to that point, they're not going to have that code.
I'm aware with it with different applications, right? Like when we're going into, but you mentioned email. That's also one that districts can set up, because you said that's what 90%.
Yeah, email should like all have included an MFA option. So like whether what it is,
Do most school
at
districts
no
have that?
cost.
No, that's something they're getting into. It's still that awareness to your technology, whoever's managing your technology systems. It's getting easier than it used to be. MFA to implement.
Only
MFA,
because if it's 90%, right? If that's what you're saying, if 90% of our attacks are on this email, then MFA might be an option.
I mean, it's not the end all be all. There's ways around it.
Sure.
There's ways to social engineer into someone into giving them those credentials so that you can still bypass that.
Right.
But it's just like leaving your front door unlocked when you leave the house. Like it's a huge step into like And another thing that I was going to mention earlier, and just the different things we've been talking about, is with MFA especially is one of those things. Without like administrative buy-in on that, it's really hard to get that pushed in your environment, in your district.
Because that's a whole, I'm assuming, training.
It's a whole training. It's a whole pushback. Like I don't want to have to put stuff on something on my personal phone. Like like there's the headache of like I'm going to have to do this every time I log in, and that's not necessarily the reality. You can set conditional access. So if you don't change locations, it's not going to do it. But having the administrative support of that, and just cybersecurity in general, if you don't have that support, there's a lot of pushback. And like and when you try to implement something without that support, like it's just going to fall on its face.
So do y'all do that to where an employee then would have to log on into their cell phone and then do that? Do y'all do that?
So we've started implementing that. And the reason we've done that is because of phishing emails. So you have to remember, a phishing email is probably going to ask you for a username and password. If it's really serious, it's going to say, oh, this is so-and-so at the technology services, has nothing to do with Cyber.
Or it's just going to be password reset. And it's going to look exactly like your Microsoft or Google password reset page.
And you click on it, type in your username, password. Well, it goes to whomever
It is, the attacker.
and then they try to log in. So what MFA does for your email is says, oh, you're logging in from this IP address. That's not what I have authority to grant you right to. So I'm going to send you a message that says, is this really you? And that's what MFA does for your email. That's a great protection to have. It's just getting to where Microsoft is helping implement that more than they used to. They're really pushing it for school districts to use if you're using Outlook.
I think it's almost become a mandatory
Yes,
now.
and
yeah.
Google is using it. So even today, if you have a personal Google account and you go log into another computer, if you've got your privacy and security set where it should be, when you log into that other device, even though you've logged in over here,
You're gonna get that
it's going to say,
notification.
click on your Google page or something to ensure this is you. So that's what MFA does for your email. A lot of people don't think that email is email probably is it's the most used technological service you have in your district. If you ever just ask somebody for the statistics of your email that you get, how many emails you send and receive on a daily basis, it'll just blow you away.
But that username and password is not just email.
It's
That's
username
your
and
world
password.
on the
Right.
network.
But they
so
get
if
it
they have
from the
that,
email.
then you have lots of
So one of the
access.
things that you mentioned earlier when we were talking this morning was that y'all don't give students email addresses.
The district decided that years ago, and we've got communication internally. We've got ways for students. Students have their username and password that they can log into. If they log into a Chromebook, it looks like an email address because that's the way Google designed their logins. So it appears that there's an email, but there's not. Years ago, back in the I guess 1990s and early 2000, E-rate would discount email. You could apply for an E-rate discount if you did email for your students. So some districts actually started using emails for students, and they continue. Some only use email for students at the secondary level because of college and applications and not elementary level.
Yeah.
So if you provide email for your student, that's even another level of security that you have to have in
So
place.
you don't have to. You
No.
can set up a whole nother system where it's only internal.
It's
And
internal.
those should really only be the only people communicating with your students,
You
right?
would hope, yes.
And that whole concept of that is reducing your threat landscape.
Exactly.
And
It
so
is.
just like, not having all these applications, not having things that are public facing, shutting down ports on your router or your firewall that's not being used. So you're just reducing the attack surface of things that can be vulnerable and things that can be compromised. So that's a great
Right.
step in doing that.
And I do want to go back to what Todd said about your email. The username and password for your email is typically your network username and password.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I explained to some of my staff, I guess a couple of years ago, I said the one thing you have to remember is for public education, everything we do is public. Our
Right.
budgets are public. Our fund balance is public. Our payroll is public. And that's public around the world public, not public just the United States. So if they come in and get your username and password for your email, they have a username and password for your network. If they have a username and password for your network, think about the financial impact
Right.
that you're about to make on the district that you've clicked that phishing email from. And I said, they're looking at your fund balance and they think, oh, this district has $2 million fund balance. They can afford $600,000 to give us, try to get ransomware from. So why don't I try to hit that district to get that money from?
Right.
And along that lines too, like all that public information, there's a whole other threat landscape or threat vector of the social engineering aspect of like, they know that you've issued a bond and that it was passed for this millions of dollars to build this building.
getting a lot
and
more
so,
savvy.
So they can attack the business office, and that's happened in Texas
Right.
more than once, unfortunately, that they've redirected a payment on a construction project for that, was millions of dollars. So there's that information being out there, like just totally.
Exactly.
So let's say I'm a school district administrator and I get the email. I don't even know how I would be notified. But do you pay the ransom?
do you pay
Todd.
the ransom?
I'm holding up your payroll.
That is a great question, and that's something.
Where would
that-
I go? Who would I contact? Like if I get that, what's the first step? Do I contact the police? Do I contact the technology director? Like
So, like,
what?
if you walk in the morning and you see this note and no one can log in on your computers, then call anyone that you can. You can call me. That's fine. DIR is a great resource as well.
Okay.
But yes, definitely call and before that point, really, you should the biggest thing, and one of the next biggest things on the list there is incident response, which is that in these situations you need to have a plan. An incident response plan is going to be outside of your network to an extent, because if your computer's locked up, you won't have email, you won't have your file system, you won't have any access to these things that you've saved, and you just typically just go in there.
Probably won't work.
You might not be able to unlock your doors to even get in the building because those are all controlled as well. But the FBI should be on the top of the list. The fusion centers, the field offices around the state, they can help you out. Us, DIR, if you have a security vendor that, the region, if they're providing you security services, definitely give them a call. But at that point, if they're still spreading, you might be able to stop the spread. You could go and, shut down physical switches and that sort of thing. As far as for forensics purposes, you don't necessarily want to turn off the device if there's an aspect you want to figure out, what happened, because sometimes if you turn the device off, things that are in memory will go away.
Okay.
That could be, crucial in determining that. So the guttural response is just going to shut everything down to stop it, but that's not necessarily, if you can disconnect the network, that's probably the best first step solution.
Is there a switch where you just disconnect the network?
If you have the right access, if you can get in the data center with all the card readers and stuff down, then yes, that's possible. But and then
I think that's right. Like that's that biggest scare, right? But I think you also mentioned you need to plan for that. And so, what are our security measures to prevent that?
And then also in that incident response, you should have talked about how much ransom can we pay. And so there's the whole, gambit. Personally, I do not like the idea of paying the ransom just because it perpetuates the whole problem. But there's situations where paying the ransom can keep the data that they've exfiltrated, because these days, every ransomware since the last 2 or 3 years, they've downloaded data from your environment. And they're using that in more and more bad ways now, because people are maybe tending not to pay the ransom. And so they're getting more and more desperate. Like there was some things last week where they're releasing PII from students, like handwritten notes about things that have happened, that they've collected when they downloaded this stuff, trying to exploit the children to get you to pay the ransom. So determining, one, is it worth it? Do you have insurance?
Sure.
What was your threshold? Because in the heat of the moment, you're going to be desperate, and emotion's going to be involved, and you just want to get back. There's the pressure from outside.
Which is why you should have that
plan. So
having
that plan and then stepping that out,
beforehand.
and then who, what, when, where. What are you going to do? Who are you going to call? Who's your helpline? And
we actually train on that.
So we do
provide
so same thing with physical security, having that same thing with cybersecurity.
And practice it. Don't just develop it, but practice it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Practice that incident response plan. Walk in the door. We've had an attack this morning. What are we doing?
Cybersecurity attack.
Because
I think a lot of districts are thinking of the drills, and they're not thinking of to drill a cybersecurity attack.
You have to. I recommend that you've got to drill that cybersecurity attack, because even in the plan, in the heat of the moment, you're going to think you're following the plan, but you're going to look down. If you've not practiced it, if you really don't know, when we're down and out and it's 0 to 7 and you're on the 1 yard line and you got to make the pass, who do you really need to make? Do you really always throw it to that person, or do you look at your landscape and figure out, at this heat of the moment, no, it's not Todd, I need to call, it's you, because of the incident that just happened.
There's the whole that you might not even think about, with the ransomware. If you think the tabletops are great, I know that's number one. The best way to go through that is because you're going to have a communications team that's
Absolutely.
that's going to talk to reporters, because they're going to be there. You can't go to school, and why are the kids going to school, and why?
I heard of a
happening?
district that got an attack, and they were doing all of the seniors' grades. And so it was right at that time when they needed it for college applications, which I was like, that is clever. So I think they are getting a lot more clever.
Oh, they're very optimistic, but also clever too. And the backups. And so just the tabletops can help you make sure that, and test them, fully tested, that you can bring something back up, because if you're not going to pay the ransom, you're going to have to restore stuff. And so do you have a way to do that? And then they're very crafty, because I've heard a story too about, there's cloud backups that are immutable, which means they can't be changed. But this one particular instance, a threat actor got into that. They waited around. They got into that online backup. they deleted them and changed the
Wow.
retention period. So like there was no way to like remove it. They
Yeah.
like changed their accounts and different things.
Yeah.
I think they were still able to maybe restore a little bit of that one back, but they're very crafty and like, they're highly motivated because this is a business, again,
Sure.
just like the DDoS, as a service, ransomware is a service. So there's different ones, different ransomware variants that have been created by different people. And there's people that are administrating and collecting the fees, the ones that are actually, phishing you and getting you, and then the person that created it gets a bigger cut of that whole deal. So like it's
Yeah.
a whole business model.
one
They
of
have data centers, like it's a
Sure.
it's a legitimate job
But you
in
also
some of these
said
countries.
something that I didn't think about. You said insurance. So just when districts do their hazard analysis, obviously you don't need hurricane flooding insurance in El Paso. But is that something that more and more districts are getting? Is cybersecurity insurance?
Yes.
Yeah, I think a lot of them had it. Like if TASB, one of the Texas Association of School Boards, had a default policy, if you remember, and I think there was for half the districts in the state were members of TASB. And I know in recent times, it used to be like a cash cow, industry, as far as cybersecurity insurance goes. But in the last few years, they've been losing their hat on that a lot, and
Because of all of the attacks.
and so they've really been cracking down to continue to get coverage that you have, minimum standards, you have things in place, MFA, that you're training your people, you're doing this and that,
Got backups.
and so they are definitely tightening down on that as far as that goes. But yeah, insurance is great as far, even if it's not paying the ransom, just recovery to help
Sure.
the cost of like getting
it's the
someone to
same
come
cycle
in.
as emergency operation
Paying
planning. Yeah, it's the
for
same.
credit monitoring. If like you have a bunch of data that goes out and you need to pay credit monitoring for a year, so that's expensive.
Right.
And so insurance can cover that.
It's you would have never, I would say 10 years ago even, you wouldn't have thought we would be where we are today with cyber crimes and with securing our resources. We have more data. This is a public, this is going to go out to the world, but
It is.
and they already know it, but we probably have more data on kids than any other institution in the world.
Sure.
I mean, it's like Todd was saying, if they get into our network, they get everything about that child.
So we've got to protect it.
And think about it, everything. Notes that have been written and scanned in, everything.
And it
about
may
that
take
child.
years before anyone ever realizes.
Exactly.
So if they don't, if it's not a ransomware incident, and there's the time that threat actors are in the environment before they're realized, the average is like 6 months.
Wow.
And so there's different tools that can definitely detect that faster, but it's a lot of lead time. And so if they're just wanting to extract information, they might not know
They
it
sit on
until
it
the
for a
kid
while.
turns 18 and tries to get some credit,
Right.
and all of a sudden they've
And
got all
it's
this
been
stuff.
breached. And we have staff information. You think about all the
Sure.
staff information we have. I mean, we know all your insurance. We know
Retirement. You know how many years till I retire.
Yeah, we know all that stuff. So it's we're not just zeros. We don't teach reading math anymore. So you take a school district the size of Cy-Fair, we have a police department, we have health, we have nutrition, we have facilities, we are a city. We are everything that has to do with a city, and probably more because now we have to protect kids.
Right.
So we are the whole function of a city. So when you're doing an incident response plan, you need to cover the whole city for the incident response plan. Your health, your data, your network, everything needs to be a part of that incident response plan. And I think in the past, we
They forget about
siloed them.
technology. I think they've forgotten about it.
We've
Right.
siloed it. So instead of siloing it, let's bring it all together. If you have an effective incident response plan in your district, you're going to cover the whole gamut. You're not just going to focus on one certain silo for your incident response.
What advice would you give to a school district? And I'm going to say a school district with 1,200 students
Okay.
to improve their cybersecurity plan. What's the number one thing? And Todd, I'm going to ask you the same thing.
So the number one thing for a small school district is know your environment.
What does that mean? When you say know your environment, what
know
does that
what
mean?
you have. Know what tools you have in place. Look at the tools that you have in place.
And that can be everything from your hardware and your facilities to what are the teachers using.
Exactly.
Okay.
To know that, and then train, become an awareness, develop a culture of safety. whether it's cybersecurity safety, whether it's building safety, but they're all under one umbrella. But develop a culture of how do we protect? Ask your question, how are we protecting this? How are we protecting that? And don't ever stop asking questions. Go to your peers, go to your regional service centers, go to your vendor partners. What are we doing? Where are we at? You don't have to be perfect, but look at your cybersecurity plan or put a plan together and protect your crown jewels. Start with something simple that you can be successful at. Start where you can, don't try to eat the elephant in one bite. What do you need to protect first? Put your committee together. This is not an individual person's responsibility. Correct. And I think sometimes that's where it overwhelms us, is we think, oh, it's just Karen that has to do all this. But it's really not. Right. It's that culture that you develop. So put your committee together. However you develop committees, and say, this is what we need to do. This is where we're at. Good, bad, indifferent, whatever. But where do we need to go next? How do we get there? And it's okay. Just eat that elephant a bite at a time. Don't try to have the whole thing done at one time. And just methodical. Just move slow and methodical. Do what you can do. And what you're going to realize is the more that you do, the easier it gets. And the easier it gets to figure out how you can fund it. Because the first thing we think is, no, I can't afford that. But really, you're doing some things already that you can apply to, that you can say, I've got this in place. So I guess it's, don't get overwhelmed. Don't think you have to do it all at one time. Okay. But just take a methodical step about it and ask questions and see where you need to be. We are all at different levels. So,
as every district is, like you said, each district is different.
And what you want to be able to do is, when something happens, is be able to look and say, we've done everything we know to do right now. And we're doing everything we can. And if you can look and say that, then you're doing what you can do.
Todd?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think the top of the list is what Karen started out as, knowing what's in your environment. So there's tools around that you can utilize to maybe look at all your public-facing websites to see what kind of servers have been set up. So if you might come into that role and you haven't been in there historically, there's a lot of stuff that you might not even know about. And so knowing what you have, you can't protect what you don't know. And so knowing what that is great. And then there's some high-level stuff that you can do, like MFA is one, having an instant response, making sure your backups are secure and working, and that offline, again, a format so that in the case of a ransomware, that they're going to be available, because they're going to look and try to do that. I've seen where they've waited around for weeks and months to take care of those, so that that's the whole motivation there. And then there's lots of free resources out there too. There's things from the federal government. There's things there's CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Services Agency.
Who we provide training
Security
with.
Agency. And then there's MSISAC, which is a multi-state information sharing analysis center. So that's more of a function that the organization is CISSecurity, and they have some free things like MDBR is a basically just DNS filtering.
I don't know.
It's DNS domain names services. So like you type in Google in your browser, like the internet doesn't function by going that name. It translates that to an IP address. And so where that IP address lives is the domain name services, it routes you to that. And so known phishing things that are, URL or a link that comes through, and if it's phishing, if it doesn't resolve that to an IP address, it can't get there. So these things just stop that. It's not the end all and be all, but it's a great way to, it's a great thing to do, and it's free. You can get that free through MSISAC. And so another one is in the realm of knowing what's in your environment is, so CISA offers a cyber hygiene service. And so they will publicly scan every week your public-facing things that you're aware of. So you need to know what you have in your environment first. So you got to start there. But once you know that, you can sign up for a list of that, and they'll, it publicly scans like your websites that are publicly facing, anything in your IP ranges. And so if you have a remote desktop, RDP client that's out there and listening on the internet, it'll make you aware of that. That's a bad thing, by the way. And it should be behind a gateway or something, because they can just password spray that and without a whole lot of visibility internally. But it'll do that and send you a weekly report, and you can hey, I need to set this patch on the server or this or that and the other. It gives you some visibility in what's going on, and it's free. It's a free service. It's great.
Sure, that's great.
And there's lots of free things out there. And like I said, MFA, setting that up, kind of a stopgap on your email. Like that's the number one place where it's going to be needed. And then, reaching out, again, asking questions, reaching out to peers, getting involved in other organizations. What are they doing in their environments? If you can get some sort of pen test, if there's something from like a regional level, I know a lot of them provide some services like that, to really give you a look of, an overall look at your environment and things that, they'll find stuff that you might not even be aware of too, if you can afford something like that.
Well, test it and drill it, like kind of what we've talked about, which is, what we do normally with our facilities and that, but it's the same thing because what happens when?
Exactly.
And then I think, and then also, we also really push that after action review. So once you find out, oh my gosh, 5 of these teachers all clicked on it, well, then what?
Yeah.
What then? Does that mean we need to continue our training? What does all of that mean so that it doesn't continue to just perpetuate the same issue that we have?
And I really like the idea of the training not being like a once a year training scenario. Like it's an ongoing thing. You're educating them, just like, you don't talk about school safety, once a year,
just in August,
and then that's it. And no one talks about it again. Like it should be an ongoing thing. Teachers all the time, they'll have passwords laying around and students compromise that because it's just laying around. Like, the idea and the concept of this whole holistic approach, we need to talk about that so everyone's concerned about
kids
their
are smart.
privacy.
I mean, I have teenagers and they will, when the password changes at the high school, I mean, that's the first thing. They're more apt to try to figure out what the password is for the new password than, setting for a test.
I listened to this, it's another podcast, but it's specifically cybersecurity related. It's called Dark Knight Diaries. It's really good. And they explained a lot of concepts. And like half the people that are on there did it and started when they were like 14, 15 years old.
There you go.
Like took down major corporations, did all this stuff when they were kids. So kids are super crafty.
I wasn't joking. You got, we look at our district, and when we went 1-to-1, I was like, that's 118,000 hackers we got to, we're going to have challenges with. And not, like I said, a lot of times it's not on purpose. It's just because they do what they do. They're just kids. Now, some of them are, but the majority of them are.
Now, do y'all, when you're doing your training with students, one of the things that we obviously train on is if you see something, say something. Is that kind of being incorporated inside? Like if you see, what does that look like from a cybersecurity?
The kids are telling each other.
What are they saying? Like, what are they telling you?
Did you know that they clicked on the network and they saw this spreadsheet and it had this in it? I'm telling you.
Okay.
It's really interesting, especially if it was not on purpose.
Not super scary for you? I'd be like, what?
Well, we have them right now. Our 1-to-1 devices strictly go to the cloud.
Okay.
So they don't have access to our internal network as far as where our data center is. But it depends on the devices you're running and what all resources.
But those
you
are all
provide
things
for the
that people need
students.
to be thinking about
Exactly.
beforehand, right? Like it's not just, hey, let's give them on the same access as our finance.
Exactly. Your network design needs to be different. I mean, you truly almost, with students, really, you almost want to have 2 separate networks for them to connect to and get their resources through. Same thing with your wireless network. You want to make sure that your wireless network is secured enough to where if they're not an authenticated device on your network, that they have a total different path to go to get to resources instead of getting to your data center network. So a lot of that's network design and what you're implementing whether you're doing it new or you're restructuring or you're, deploying new technologies because you're replacing old technologies. A lot of that's just thinking the process through of where that road takes you. When they plug in or when they connect wireless, what path is it going to take and what all do they have to go through to get to their primary usage path? So
do y'all allow students, if they don't use your device, can they bring their own?
we have
But then they have to log on to something different.
they log on to what's called our BYOT SSID, which then directs them out
And
to
tell me what that is.
it's bring your own technology. We called it BYOT.
SSID is like the Wi-Fi
okay.
name, basically.
okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of
So
like
they can't get onto the school and they have their own.
they go out just directly to the internet and get to the internet resources, and then that's restricted based on our content filter.
Sure.
So you've got your network for your authenticated district-owned devices, and then you've got a network for guest or bring your own technology devices, and then we have a network for the Internet of Things devices. Those are devices that what we call are headless. That means they don't have a monitor and a keyboard to it,
They're
and they
just-
connect to. And usually those devices are our HVAC controls. They're something is as a diabetes
Cameras?
monitor. Our cameras we
Facility
actually
cameras?
put because we control those and manage
Okay.
those. So those go in a different, and they're wired. They're not necessarily wireless.
So our safety directors, we need to make sure if they're not BFFs with Best Friends Forever,
Exactly.
for doing the acronyms, with their IT directors, that's something that they really need to, especially with all of the new probably mandates that are coming down.
I would, yes.
I would say safety and security is touching more and more with IT now more than ever.
The planning needs to be hand in hand. In fact, we just met about a month ago with our safety and security. The 2 grants that were out for safety and security to apply for,
Right.
for the emergency response buttons and the other monitoring, we were a part of that initial grant conversation.
Great.
And we're helping them plan and asking about software and what they were doing. So it's very important that you include those folks in it. You may not be talking the same language right now, but the more you work together, the more a lot of the language becomes very familiar on both sides about what the
Great.
responsibilities
And that
are.
only helps everybody.
Yeah. It's we've got to get out of our silos.
Absolutely.
And we got out of the silo with instruction. That took some time. Now we've got to get out of the silos with facilities and safety and security.
And adding cybersecurity to that.
Exactly. That's
Awesome.
right.
Well, do you have anything else to add?
You just made me think of something specifically with ransomware, like
Uh-huh.
getting out of our silo, but then also just ransomware, like getting out of the shame of there's a big shame of like getting hit with ransomware and not wanting to tell anybody or sharing information.
I
and
have
that doesn't
heard
help.
that. They're
that
like, they
doesn't
don't
help
tell us
anybody.
what they did wrong, so we don't know how to
Exactly.
prevent that on
Like
our
if there was a
own.
school incident, like you need to
Sure.
know the safety things and what happened so that other people can look in their environment and know how
Absolutely.
to protect themselves. And so I think sharing that information, there's reporting requirements for that. But that doesn't happen a lot of times. I think a lot of these are underreported. Statistically, ransomware has gone up, but I think it's gone up way more than it actually has
been
been
reported.
reported.
Right.
Because there's a lot of that find out later, like, oh, this district had some ransomware. Well, I didn't know about
Nobody
this.
told
They
me.
were supposed to
Right.
tell me, and then just trying to obfuscate that to be not ransomware. Like there was
Sure.
a big article on Minneapolis school district that called it an encryption event, and like they described the whole thing, and that was one of the had like a handwritten document about students,
Right.
in the
In
the
the
extortion part of that, the ransom, but they didn't want to call it a ransomware event. And so
And also, let's not forget law enforcement, right? Like in
Exactly.
any of this. Like this isn't something also that is just specific to school districts. So it's not like it's everybody. Everybody is, we're all on our
It's-
phones. We're doing all of
there's
this.
major corporations that have been victim to this, and they have like highly paid, sophisticated security things. So like,
But law enforcement as well, Department of Homeland
There's-
Security, CISA,
yes,
all of there
they
are
all
also
work
groups
together.
there
They're
to
all
support
trying-
us to make sure. So if something like that happens, know that you can contact the Fusion Center. You
Yeah,
can contact
yeah.
the FBI. You
and
can do
CISA has
that.
been recently has been great about giving us some pre-ransomware threat intelligence, and so
Yes.
we've
Right.
actually been able to, I think, stop ransomware in a few school districts in the last 6 months because
Right.
of that information. So if they didn't have other information that was shared with them, I think their
wouldn't know.
intel wouldn't have been as good. And so I think
Exactly.
sharing that, being open about that is
Or
a
this
really
is what
high
we're
thing.
seeing
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
the landscape, in the digital landscape.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we try to do in our TETL organization is we get together and share lessons learned, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. We talk about, well, if this is one place we looked, but we didn't look deep enough. So we learn from each other. That's one thing that I do appreciate about the technology world, which it's K-12 in general, but we're all willing to share. We're all willing to give. We're all willing to figure out it didn't work here, so what's working for your school district, or what are you doing to make it work? So I just organizations reach out to organizations,
You're not
whether you're large
alone.
or small. You are
Make a friend.
definitely find a friend, phone a friend. You know, whatever.
Absolutely.
I
like
mean,
it's
it's
law
Text a
enforcement,
friend.
as
Yes.
well. So
Yeah.
like if you come to that, Monday morning and
Absolutely.
walk in, you know who to call and you have a relationship there. And
yeah.
And they
Yeah.
do know. I mean, I know we serve law enforcement as well, and they are absolutely aware of the things that are going on as too. And so
Exactly.
that's part of that multidisciplinary stakeholders in our safety and security committees is we
Yes.
want multiple people to be able to say at those safety committees, hey, IT, did you know that this is going on? And that
Exactly.
is really the gist of that law. Is it shouldn't just be Todd, it shouldn't just be Celina, Karen, regarding whatever silo
Yes.
you're in. It's going to have to take
all of us.
everybody knowing all of the different dots that are out there to see if they connect.
So when you're making your checklist, that's one of the things that we've started doing. Does the checklist say, have you involved these organizations? And I think for cybersecurity, that was one thing that I can say probably 4 years ago, we would have never really thought to get facilities involved.
Right.
It's just because of where we are today. But 4 or 5 years ago, if you were ahead, yes, you got them involved. But if you're mid-sized district, then you probably thought, well, we can do this. We can bring facilities in later. But they really need to be a part of the initial. They need to be a part of all the tabletops. They need to be a part of everything that you're doing for your facilities, your security, whoever owns your security response plan for your district, the physical security side.
Well, and I think a lot of places, we always talk about the budget and all that kind of stuff, but it's really important also to ensure that you have your finance person involved as well.
Exactly, yes.
So because a safety director or a transportation director can find out, go to a conference and find out about all of these great things, but there is a cost, obviously.
Exactly.
And I know, cameras are a perfect example. Where are you going to house the data for the cameras? Who has access to it? So that's, that's the whole, the hardware part, and then the software. But then also, how often do those cameras need to be replaced?
Exactly.
How often do you have to pay every year for that software update? Is that money in your budget? And so it really does touch all aspects of that school district. And I know maybe it's me because I'm a former finance person, but it was like, did we ask? So you're thinking of a 3-year contract, but what does that mean if we buy 500 cameras? How long are those cameras going to last? What's the software? Is it every year? So it's not just that first initial cost,
Yep.
but is it all of that as well?
And it doesn't put you in a funding silo by yourself.
Absolutely.
Because you have to think about everything that it takes to fund this. And if you try to fund it on your own, it does get expensive. But if you
Sure.
can combine all of your resources together,
Absolutely.
that funding may not be so bad if you know that you've already got some of these other items in place that you need to help, and you combine that funding, and that funding can help you be a little bit more successful.
Well, and what I think it does is it helps the posture of the entire district, and everybody actually knows what that posture is, right?
Exactly.
And so they obviously only have one pot of money, but if they're saying this is what we're going to work toward, that's something that you can also easily communicate with your community. We don't have $80 million, so but we do have this, and this is how we're going to work toward that to improve.
And then, just bring that up to, maybe your administration, especially a smaller district, if they have a plan and they ask for it, like communicate what you need. So that, they are aware that, maybe that's not an issue, but I feel
Right.
like it probably is.
Well, and I think
that they
a lot
don't
of-
know what they need to be, road mapping for down the road.
Sure.
Exactly.
And I think the other thing is, I know we hear a lot of times, people getting frustrated because they say IT won't let them. Right. Yeah,
Security is typically the
obviously have
opposite of
touched a
no,
nerve.
so,
I have obviously touched a nerve. But what I'm saying is, but it's not that you're saying no, but you might also have a different product, and it may not have all the bells and whistles that they're wanting, but it's going to keep the data safe.
Exactly.
And that's not something, and I think that's also something that we do need to do a better job of communicating with our teachers and with our students. We're going to use this one because this one keeps our data safe. That other one
Exactly.
doesn't. And
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
the why. And so explaining the why and not just, you can't have that software.
Yeah.
The
But
same reason you're checking outside doors. There's a reason why we're not allowing this or that.
Exactly.
There's some
Exactly.
issue there that's.
And your technology services may already have a solution deployed, but they're not using all of the
Absolutely.
resources.
Or they may not even know it at that campus.
Exactly,
I think
yeah.
that's the other thing too, is one campus is using something, they've bought this software, it's working. And then, as a school district, you don't want, how many campuses do you have?
We've got 90.
You don't want 90 different
98.
softwares at 90 different
Yeah.
campuses,
Yeah.
right? And so obviously also from a financial perspective, you're going to want to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck for providing 1 or 5.
Yeah. And
So-
that's some things that we find out in larger districts is sometimes we're using resources that we already have, and we know it has the capability to add additional, resources to it. And then you've got this other department that goes out and finds a totally different solution, but they're doing the same thing.
Absolutely,
So
yes.
that's where, trying to break down those
And
silos
we find that
really
also
work.
in safety and security,
Yes.
like there's this software that they have to report to, and then they're using this over here, and then and they're all kind of doing the same. And what that can also amount to is fatigue on the user, on our
Exactly.
teachers. They're like, I'm supposed to report this to
How many
5
different
different
places?
ways. And a lot of times when we're doing our operationalizing technical assistance, it's that the different groups didn't realize that they were all doing those different things. And so that's one of generally our main recommendation. Can we consolidate that into 1 or 2?
And then that affects your funding. That
Absolutely.
gives you more funds to
Yeah.
do what you need to do with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, anything else? Cybersecurity.
Or we could keep talking.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, thank you for being here. And I am assuming, but if anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns, they can always reach out to you.
Exactly.
And they'll find that
Absolutely, yeah.
information on the website.
Yes,
Awesome.
that's
All right.
right.
Thanks for being here at the Learning Lab.
Thank you
you.
for inviting us. Thank you.
Awesome.